Good afternoon. So thank you so much, Pradeep and Zara, for making sure that audience is pepped up. Speaking after lunch is never easy. So when I saw the agenda and figured out that I have to speak after the lunch, I was definitely concerned. And thanks, Pradeep, very easy to put some pressure that you will sleep when the keynote is starting. So I looked at YouTube videos, I tried to read something, how should be my starting, what should be my opening, and they said, many of them said, crack a joke. It was very difficult for me to become a stand-up comedian, so here I am, ladies and gentlemen, presenting to you World Quality Report 2019. So before I start, just a few data points. This year, the World Quality Report brought in several changes. This is bigger than before. And there are a few innovations. We polled 1,725 respondents from 32 different countries. And if you look at the mix, that is very interesting. 25% of them are CIOs. And I would like to point you, QA and testing manager constitutes 19%. So essentially, 81% are outside the QA domain. And you will see the reason as I talk more on the findings, why is that case. Some of the innovations that we have brought in as you go through the report, and this is just to give you a glimpse. I would request you to download the report and go through it. We have introduced the commentary after each of the themes from the subject matter experts. Some of them are our customers who have lived through those themes. And you will find that very insightful and interesting. We also have included digital manufacturing and product engineering in the mix and included Japan as a country rollout. So there are 6 key themes that are covered this year in the World Quality Report. The first one is QA orchestration in DevOps and Agile. That's the first theme. Then we move on to application of AI and ML in testing and QA. And this is something which is very prevalent. You have several speakers talking about that, several sessions happening on that. We also bring in the industry point of view related to that particular theme. We have the intelligent automation in QA. Test data and environment is our 4th theme. We introduced security imperative as the 5th theme, which is a newly introduced theme this year, followed by the cost and efficiency. So very interestingly, when we polled the respondents and asked them, what is their expectation from QA? Not very surprisingly, and as we go through this particular report, you will find that some of the data points will validate the common understanding, and some will challenge. So it's a mix of both, because when you go and poll 1,725 respondents, you get an entire gamut of audience who are responding to that particular survey. Now, the expectation from the QA is that it will be aligned to the business, not only that, it will help deliver business the outcome. You see the third option, which is the end user satisfaction. That was something which was higher last year, but still remains in the top 3. And of course, the second, which is finding the defects which, before they get into the UAT or the production, remains very high. Now, what is interesting is on the right side. And I think there is enough said and enough debated on that. I don't want to spend too much time debating that, but would be interesting to hear some of your perspective. One thing which is coming out very clearly is answer to the question, is QA losing its distinct identity? And more important, because all of the audience here most likely is from the testing and the QA profession, is very relevant for our existence. So is it good or bad? If QA, so the answer is, what we saw from the respondents, there is a significant shift, and QA is losing out its separate identity. But relevance of quality cannot be any lesser. Our point of view, hearing from the industry leaders, is that it is good to be QA or the quality implicit in continuous in each of the phases, the entire process, rather than being end stage separate process. Any thoughts on that? We have several experience. For example, there are cases where there are digital teams who dismantled complete QA and now coming back and saying that set up the QA teams but with a different blueprint. So we saw some of those things. Anyone in the audience would like to share any observation on this particular point? Feel free to say so. Otherwise, we anyway have a Q&A towards the end. Any takers? Okay, we'll move on. Now, the first theme, which is around QA orchestration in Agile or DevOps. Needless to say that what we see on the ground is the boundaries are blurring, the dev, ops, and the testing. The silos are giving way to the new ways of working. It's very apparent. 99% of our respondents said that they are using DevOps in one form or the other in their enterprise. That's a very large number. Doesn't mean that 99% of their enterprise had moved to DevOps, but they are using in one or the other project. We also saw that lack of skill continues to be challenging. So while we said that the boundaries are blurring, it also brings forth the requirement to bring a different kind of skill, particularly on the programming, scripting, deployment. Those kind of skills are becoming relevant, and the skill boundaries between the developer and the tester is blurring. However, the mindset still needs to be of the tester. What you code is for testing, not for developing new features and functions. That is the distinction. But in terms of the base skill, pretty much, other than maybe a small percentage, which is deep domain experts, everyone needs to have programming, scripting skills, even if you are a tester. So that is coming out very strongly. The challenge which we saw was around the intelligent and connected ecosystem. One of the challenges which was talked about in various things, whether it is application of AI, ML, whether it is automation, is the lack of interconnected environments. So while you may have environments, you may have the data, they still are residing in silos. There are still challenges with respect to their availability. So that is coming out as one of the key challenges. Now, we also asked the top 5 challenges and asked the respondents to rank the importance while adopting Agile and DevOps. You see on the top, operational and business priorities are ranked highest. 25% of the respondents ranked it number 1. Now, what is surprising, and that is what I said, sometimes it validates, sometimes it is also the nature of the respondents, the way they look at the survey. So we see the culture being ranked number 1 only by 15% of the respondents, whereas in reality, on the ground, we see that that's one of the big issues when you are looking at implementing DevOps and Agile. So what are our recommendations? We are looking at, and for every theme, I'm going to give you 3 recommendations. If you go through the reports, there could be a few more. I've just tried to concise them. The first one is that we need to define lightweight test methods with focus on relevant KPIs. So if we are moving to continuous testing, for example, if you have a KPI which tracks what is the percentage of time taken by QA in the overall life cycle, that becomes irrelevant because you are saying that I'm going to start my QA from day 1, and if you are starting from day 1, then it would be 100%, which in the traditional metrics would not be a great metrics to say that QA is taking 100% of the cycle time. So those things have to be rethought and reimagined. Also the process, if you look at traditionally, there may be 28 or 30 different process areas where people are going to evaluate the maturity and come out with the recommendations. Many of those areas are losing significance. So when you are looking at a QA maturity assessment, you need to be very focused and have a lightweight process in place. The second aspect is accelerating the workforce transformation. Easier said and done because there is a tremendous growth which was witnessed in early 2000 and even latter part of the decade, the first decade of this century. So that has created a large pool of testers who are very comfortable doing the old ways of testing. And to transform that workforce, it's easier if there is a newcomer who is coming from the campus to train them in the new ways of working rather than transform someone. At the same time, you cannot undermine the application knowledge and the domain knowledge which these experienced people bring. So accelerating the workforce transformation where you take advantage of the existing knowledge, at the same time tune them to new ways of working is very important. So that's our second recommendation. And finally, which is very important, particularly for the large enterprises, who is responsible for the end-to-end testing? When there are Scrum teams and each one is looking at their user stories, which team is going to be accountable for ensuring that all the systems, when they're interconnected, they work together. And that is where probably you see the adoption of SAFe methodology for the large enterprise higher than the other methodologies. So that's a very important point, and you need to think through, make it part of a strategy to ensure that end-to-end picture is not lost. And also, if your environment has a lot of legacy system, which any large enterprise would have abundant of, you need to take care of that particular aspect. So those are our recommendations when it comes to Agile and DevOps. Now, a quick case study. This is from the KLM Air France, where they have adopted Agile QA. And I'm not going to, this is just excerpts from the report, so you are welcome to download and read, as I said before. But if you look at what is very important, is the second point there, second sentence, which says, we are not there to do the testing. And this is coming from the head of testing. He's saying we are not there to do the testing. We are there to help others do it for themselves. And I think that's one of the very fundamental shift in the way the QA heads are reimagining, or the engineering heads are reimagining testing. So their role is to create the frameworks, provision the environment and the data, define the test strategy, and look at the overall QA governance, and move more and more testing work, actual testing work, to the development teams. So this is one of the key messages which came, which I thought is very relevant, and that's why I'm sharing that with you. Now moving to the AI and ML, and this topic is very hot. You cannot get into any conference without having several speakers talking about that. Certainly that is shown in our survey. Very clearly, the things are maturing, but the domain is still evolving. There are still line of thought where we are saying, is it effective? Have you looked at the practical implications, and have you checked what is the outcome? So while the pilots are underway, the actual outcome, for example, someone says that I can prioritize your test cases, and you can cover the entire testing with maybe 40% or 50% of the test cases. The question is, what is the risk you are taking? And customer after customer, or the owners, would tell you, look, it is good that you are trying to do smart testing, but I don't want to take any risk. I don't want defects to be uncovered in the latter part of the cycle. So the question is your algorithm good enough? Have you tested it after implementation and seen what are the outcomes? So that's one of the key things, and of course, the lack of skill. So here, we have just written some of the use cases. I'm not going to go through all the use cases. There are different use cases of AI and ML implementation in testing, which is becoming relevant, starting with prioritizing the testing, predicting the defects, doing better planning, looking at the code coverage, creating a regression suite automated fashion. So all those things are very, very relevant test cases. One of the very interesting things that we see is, how do you make sense of the production data, and how can you use that insight to further strengthen your testing? So do analytics on the production, but then tie it up with the testing. And that's a very interesting area where things are still evolving. I have seen the outcome of some algorithm, and what I find, it is still giving a lot of insight to the production support team, but tying it back to testing still needs to evolve further. But that is definitely a use case. And our recommendations are, number one, there are still people who are skeptical, and you need to ensure that what are the initial use cases that you implement, they meet with certain amount of success, so that there is more propensity to adopt these kind of models. So pick up something. I'll just take an example. You can apply the NLP-based algorithm to find out that there are duplicate test cases. Now, if you have to run it on the automated suite, because an enterprise has automated their regression suite, how does it work? And if it doesn't work, then maybe someone is going to lose faith on this concept. So pick up the use case which is going to have a higher probability of success, prove that, and then move to others. So that's recommendation number one. The second one is on monitoring the outcome. As you are implementing these concepts, you need to be very clear on articulating the results, articulating the values, because that's how you will progress and get further investment. And the third one is on the skill. Now, this is very relevant for us as a testing professional, because the enterprises are typically formed along the lines of expertise. So you would have a testing team in various organizations. The testing team would like to do everything within their own skill availability. What we are recommending is that look beyond testing skills. Go to your insights and data team or the analytics team or whatever team it is called. Look at getting some skills. Act as a product manager. You define what you need for testing. Ask them to build those algorithms and the methods which can be used in your testing domain. So that is our recommendation. I'll quickly move to talking about a case study, which is from the Munich Re. Now here, I would like to highlight the third point, which I have been highlighting. On the traceability of AI outcome is the key importance. How do you trace whatever you implemented to the outcome? And that's going to be the key. So challenge, of course, you see there's a lot of excitement. You look the top bullet, the statement is that it is going to transform QA, which clearly shows that there is a lot of expectation and excitement. But if that excitement has to continue, then the results have to come, and the results have to come fast. And finally, the point on the bias. One thing is very clear. Once you implement AI and ML, it's not that there won't be any requirement for the human intelligence. It is an aid to human intelligence. I don't think there is a debate on that particular point. But the key thing is, are these systems themselves bringing in the bias which a normal human being brings? It could be. The chances are that bias would get reduced significantly if you are using the right set of data sets, okay, to make your decisions. Okay? So those are some of the key things that we found out. Our third theme is around test automation. And surprisingly, the number of people who say, how much is automated, that is still very low. And automation is still looked at automating the test execution. So we started asking, other than the test execution, what are the other aspects of testing which you have automated? And you can see several responses around that. On the test environment virtualization, model-based testing is something which is gaining significant ground, and we have seen an uptake on that. RPA, headless automation, test data automation, and the test design automation, which is also a flavor of the model-based testing. Now, here, one of the things which was surprising, when we checked how much of an API and microservices is automated, the answer was surprising because the percentage of API automation is still very, very low. And there are a lot of enterprises who are still looking at starting with the UI and automating all the way downwards, rather than looking at each of the layers and attacking them separately. The other aspect was the tools. While there are tools and there are mature tools, there is an uptake on the open source. So those are some of the key things. The recommendation that we have essentially is to build the framework and take the framework route for the testing teams, which is intuitive, which knows what kind of tests need to be automated, which is dynamic, resilient. Now, a lot of adjectives I'm using, but you need to reimagine the testing, test automation, essentially. And this is an opportunity for us to reimagine test automation because the traditional way of automating has become mainstay. And if you ask certain organization how much of your regression is automated, the answer could be 85% or 90%. But how much of it being used, and this is really helping you to cut down on the cycle time and improve the quality, the answer is still inconclusive. And that tells us that you need to really think differently and create a framework which will answer that particular question rather than just looking at a number of percentage automation. Any points here on this? I've covered 3 themes. Anyone has any comments? You want, can we just have a mic? So I'm very sure that these things are not entirely new to you, and you may have a point of view, but it's always good to look at things differently and then go back and try to implement some of that. Please.
Yeah, like you initially said that the between testing and development, it is the boundaries are blurring now, and automation is also not increasing much. The one which is really working. So, in your view, how do you see that this blurring and moving towards left without having a working automation will really help us?
Yeah, so it's definitely the challenge. That is what is bringing the friction points. So the question is that if you're not automating enough, how can you shift left, how can you do continuous testing? So the answer is it's very difficult to do continuous testing without automation. And that too in sprint automation, progressive automation, rather than just the regression automation. Now, what we have seen, when you look at certain type of technology stack, for example, if you're looking at the digital portfolio, things are much better because these are the new technology stack, which is amenable to new ways of working. Whereas if you look at the legacy part of the business, things are different. And the key is how do you bring it together? And that is why we were saying that you need to reimagine automation, start looking at how can I make it comprehensive, at the same time look at multiple layers separately. For example, can you virtualize something which is not available and the pace is different? So there are techniques, you need to focus on that. So valid point, thank you so much for that. So I'll move to the next case study on this. Now here, if you really look at it, the expert here is saying that the cost and the perceived value of automation still remains a challenge. This is a very key point. While people want to automate, the cost and what is the value? Are we using it? Because the question that the stakeholders are asking, if you're saying that I have done 80% of the automation, why is my cycle time not reducing? Why is my budget not reducing? That's a very valid point. Quality is everyone's responsibility. Enough said on that, so I'm not going to harp on that particular point. And finally, on the tools, should you have a very tightly centralized mechanism of standardizing your tools and mandating that everyone uses the same tool, or you're going to give the flexibility? I think the different enterprises are finding that answer, and the truth is somewhere which is developing as a federated model, where there is certain amount of flexibility and the independence given to each of the teams. At the same time, there are certain enterprise mandates, and you have to work within those boundaries. So this is how it is moving. Moving to the test data and test environment. Now, this one was very revealing. This one was very revealing for the simple fact that we did not see much progress. We see a lot of talk happening on the test data and test environment, but when we actually ask them, how many of you moved to the cloud, your test environment? And 30% are still having the traditional way of having the test environment on their enterprises. So the movement is slow, the adoption is slow, the challenge is real, and this is where we see this particular area of focus. Now, cost of environment came out as one of the top issues. Obviously, if you have enough money, you have enough number of environments, probably the availability factor will improve, but can you spend that kind of money? Are you injecting defects because the environment and the data is not in sync? Was another key area. So there are several areas, and I'm not going to go through each of them. But the key is that we still see less progress being made on this particular aspect. We still see that there are test data, while the business understands the importance of the data with which the application should be tested, it is still not getting the treatment which it deserves. It remains challenging, but not enough is happening here, okay? So our recommendation is to make cloud part of your test environment solution, adopt a center of excellence approach where your test data runs as a shared service in a federated model and provides those services to rest of the QA team and raise awareness and the visibility on the availability of whatever you have. So here's very interesting take from the Coca-Cola on this particular aspect. And definitely, they have adopted Agile and DevOps, which has improved or required them to have a more formal and scientific approach to the test environment and test data. They are doing more and more testing on the cloud. They have created a lean center of excellence for test data, which means that it is not a shared services organization which is doing end-to-end test data provisioning to governance, but there are certain aspects, and it's too detailed to talk in this forum right now. There are aspects which is done by the shared team, and there are aspects which are done by the individual project team. So those are some of the key things. Security. This is the first time we looked at it within the QA ambit and polled our audience. Very clearly, with the GDPR coming, it is becoming of prime importance. Of course, it is of prime importance. But it is a risk which everyone thought that you have to take that risk, have the controls which will mitigate it. So the risk around security is inevitable. You need to have the right strategy to mitigate the risk, and that is how you need to progress. So obviously, our recommendation is around automating more and more security testing. we thought, or typically, you talk to people, they say security test is completely automated. That's not the case. A lot of it still happens manually. So there is an opportunity to automate more and do it on the cloud. Look at it holistically. I'm not going to talk more on that because that is so commonsensical. And focus on the skill building and look beyond only the testing skills for providing this service. So skill in this area remains fairly challenging. You find a lot of functional testers, you find also the performance testers or the automation guys. But when you start looking for the security testers, there is still a lack of supply. And that has to be bridged and bring in a multidisciplinary approach to security testing. And finally, the cost containment and efficiency is a very interesting topic for the decision makers, for the management. What's happening here? I think one thing very clearly which is happening is that while the QA budgets are down, if I just talk in terms of the numbers, when we had World Quality Report in 2015, 35% of the budget was allocated to QA. This year, it is down to 23%. The question to ask is it really the case? Or it is that some of the testing is being done by the other groups, and that is not counted as part of the QA budget. We think that is also implicit in this. So as I talked about, the testing as a function is becoming more and more of enablement function rather than doing the testing themselves. So some of the budget is also shifting there. At the same time, there are things which have been implemented, which is really accelerating the efficiency. So automation, implementation of AI, ML, and some of the other techniques, for example, adoption of cloud, these are bringing in real efficiency. So it's no longer just a talk. There are efficiency which has been brought out, and that is impacting the QA budget for all the right reasons. So as a QA professionals, we are not so concerned that the QA budgets are down. It is about how do you do smarter way of work and provide the value. Now, this is something on the efficiency. Now, certainly, as you can see, the focus on the effectiveness and right-size the delivery approach. They have also implemented QA bots. So there are a lot of efficiency gains which are brought in by technology implementation, and that is where you see the things going. We expect that this trend will continue. The QA budgets are not going to increase. However, we also expect that the rate per unit that you pay has to be relooked at some point in time. Because if you are expecting QA to provide the business benefits, to bring in all the technology changes, bring in all the efficiency, and on the other hand, if you say that I'm going to pay less for a tester than what I paid for a developer, then your transformation is not going to take place. So rate per unit would increase or should increase, but the overall budget would continue shrinking. Okay? So those are the themes that we covered as part of our survey. And finally, just to summarize the recommendations. So we have pretty much talked on this, but just to leave you with these thoughts. Agile and DevOps, there is certainly an accelerated adoption. The suggestion is to build smart and connected ecosystem to take care of the connected testing on a continuous basis. On the AI and ML, things are maturing, the use cases are evolving. You need to pick up the right use case, implement it, see the success, and then expand. On the intelligent automation, very interesting. There is a need to reimagine the entire automation framework and bring in, so automation now is no longer standalone. You cannot just have an automation team working in isolation because you are moving to continuous testing. You are talking about test environment and test data provisioning being done in an automated fashion. So you need to bring in multiple aspects together as part of your automation solution. And that is where there is a need to create a framework which will address those challenges. Test data and test environment, as we said, remains challenged. Not enough is being done, so there is a need to, again, think about it hard, develop competencies, look at cloud as an alternative, and create a lightweight shared services organization for the test data management. Security has to be the focus of the organization. It has to be embedded in whatever you are doing. And finally, be smart on the budget. So that's all I wanted to cover. Any questions which you have, I can just take a couple of questions. Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It is good. But what I'm seeing is last 10 years, we are talking about the same thing, right? So automation, test data management, environment. So what is that challenge we have? I'm not seeing that, right? Last 10, 15 years, we are talking about the same thing. I'm not seeing anything new. What are all the challenges, what we have implemented? What do you think? Because you have done this study. So I just want to hear from you. What do you think, what is that we have to do? Whether it is from their side or I'm talking about the client or the service provider. What is that gap? Why we are not able to meet that gap?
Okay, very, very good question. I think there are a lot of progress which is being made. So some of the terms which you are hearing may be same. For example, automation, people have been talking for 15 years, and you're very right. But the automation itself is changing, and that is why what is coming out from the survey is how do you reimagine automation? Earlier, when we were talking about automation, it was about test execution automation. It was about regression automation. Things have gone far beyond that. And you are talking about automation at every layer. You are talking about automation which will enable continuous testing. You are talking about progressive automation, test design automation, test data automation. So automation, while the term remains same, the way the automation has progressed, there has been significant progress. If you look at AI and ML, which is brand new, I mean, particularly the implementation of those use cases in testing has gained significant momentum in the last 2 years. Adoption of Agile and DevOps, again, while it started with more of a digital projects story, it is gaining more momentum, and that is becoming way of working. So if a simple thing, if I ask, a very simple metrics on the skill, if I go back 10 years, and if I would have looked at my team and said that what is the percentage of my team which knows programming and scripting, the answer would have been maybe 5% 10 years back. Today, it is inching towards 50-55%, and our vision is to have that 85 to 90%. That's a significant shift. All the newcomers who are coming in this particular domain are bringing in that skill. Full stack developer and tester is becoming the norm. It's not an exception, it's the norm. So a lot of changes. I'm very hopeful. The area where we are little concerned is on the test data and test environment that I talked about. So I think with that, probably we have run out of time, or we can take
Yes, absolutely. I think you can drop your questions at www.cyto.com. And thank you so much for the presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together.
Thanks.
Thank you.